Hi everybody, my name is Kaisi, and I'm so excited to get to talk more about the Great American Songbook today. So we talked before about part of the Great American Songbook and how it's a little hard to define, right? So let's take a look at some general guidelines for what may or may not be considered part of the Great American Songbook. I know for me it feels like every time I take a look at this material, there's something new to learn, even though it's been around for nearly 100 years. Let's jump right in. Let's do a quick recap. What is the Great American Songbook, right? It is influential pop and jazz standards from the early to mid 1900s. Again, it is not an actual songbook. There is not one list of what songs may or may not be included on the Great American Songbook. So definitions have varied from time to time depending on the source, but usually it can range anywhere from the late 1800s to even as late as the mid-60s. Overall, it's an era known for timeless melodies, memorable lyrics, and enduring cultural relevance or influence. Like, imagine Taylor Swift of the 1920s. That's what we're talking about. If it is so vague, how do I know if it is in the Great American Songbook or could maybe be considered to be part of the songbook? It's more defined by an era of music with a general style rather than super specifics. There is a lot that encompasses the Great American Songbook. Like I said in my prior video, imagine defining music and talking about music from the 1960s until today and calling it one era of music. It's a lot, right? That is a lot to talk about. And yet we throw around the term so casually. It's the Great American Songbook, right? But we're talking about a really wide period of music. So when we're looking at figuring out if something may or may not be included, again, we're thinking about this in terms of a general era of music. But if we're talking about trying to figure out if a song at the very beginning or tail end is part of the Great American Songbook or is part of a different era of music, that's when the style and other influencing factors come much more into play. So the first one I like to use when thinking about if something's in the Great American Songbook is who wrote the song. Was it written by somebody who wrote other significant works during the core of the era from 1920 to 1950? And is it associated with Tin Pan Alley or the core Great American Songbook? Is the artist associated with one of those two things? That would be a great argument for inclusion. However, if it was written by somebody who mostly wrote works outside of that time window, it's less likely to count unless it was particularly influential to the songbook. So another factor to consider is, what did it sound like? What was the style of the music? If it was jazz, blues, ragtime, swing, or other popular styles of the time, that argues for inclusion. The genre is pretty encompassing, but we're not talking about the music that's maybe a little more niche or obscure for the era, genre-wise. We're talking about artists that were incredibly popular. We're talking about the Taylor Swift of the era. We're talking about the Pink of the era. We're talking about the Kesha, the Shawn Mendes, the Adele. We're not talking about niche artists. And so if it was a classical piece a rock piece, or some other genre that didn't quite align with the core popular music of the songbook, it would typically not be part of the Great American Songbook with limited exceptions. So music that seems timeless, has easy to follow melodies and universal themes, those are the types of things that would be more likely to be included. Another thing to consider, why was it written? If it was written for film or musical theater or maybe vaudeville, that's a major argument for inclusion. Since it was also pop music of the time, though, being written purely as a popular song really didn't exclude it from the songbook either. So another piece of criteria, where did the song originate from? If it was written for distribution in Tin Pan Alley, or was popularized through Hollywood or musical theater, once again, it is more likely to be included in the songbook. The next piece of criteria to consider, when was the song written? If it was written from the late 1800s to 1915 and meets at least a couple of other criteria, it's likely part of the songbook. If it was written from 1915 to 1955 and is generally a similar genre or style, yeah, that's going to be part of the songbook. If it was written after 1955, is a similar genre style, and meets the majority of other influencing factors, and also has a lasting legacy associated with other songbook music, it might be included. If it was written after the very, very early 1960s, if only rock music was really topping the charts at the time the song was written, it really wouldn't be included in the songbook, even if it was a similar genre. The final factor to consider, what was the song's influence? If all of the other factors except date apply, and the song was particularly popular in a similar way to the other songs, or had a massive cultural impact similar to how the rest of the songbook did, it may or may not be included depending on who you talk to. Again, because we are talking about a wide era of music, how do you define an era, right? It's like, think about defining the differences between millennials and Gen Z. At a certain point, you know somebody's a millennial. You know somebody is Gen Z. But there are a couple years at the tail end of either generation where it gets a little bit blurred. Yes, they say, oh, just 1996. Great. But how do they say that? Why? Why is it 1996? Someone born a couple years earlier or a couple years later is still going to have pretty similar life experiences and aren't going to be a completely different generation, right? Like, they're still going to have similar enough experiences that it's not like the difference between someone of the silent generation and a millennial, for instance, right? Like, there is at its core, there's a difference based on the time period. It's just a little bit of a slippery slope when you get to kind of the beginning and end years. So, hypothetically, let's think about this a minute. On the very early end, in the late 1800s, if something was particularly progressive or really influential to the development of the rest of the songbook, it might be included, especially if it came from Tin Pan Alley. But again, classical music from that time would not typically be included, with the exception of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. Conversely, in the late 1950s, music geared towards Hollywood or musical theater, or by an artist that was primarily established in the core years of the songbook, is more likely to be included than somebody who is doing something totally different and say is Elvis or something. Elvis is not part of the songbook, even though he was popular in the 1950s, right? Let's take a look at some very specific example songs. Okay, so first example, we're going to do a really early example. There is a song called After the Ball by Charles K. Harris. Who wrote it? Okay, that's Charles K. Harris. He wrote a few hits, with After the Ball being his most popular song. But he died in 1930. A lot of his other works, some of them were still very, very popular, but he did a lot of work with Oscar Hammerstein I, who primarily focused in opera and classical theater, rather than more modern works. And so, who isn't necessarily the strongest argument either way, just based on the timing, it's a little questionable. Okay, but what was the style? After the Ball was a timeless waltz with an easy-to-follow, honestly repetitive melody, and the theme was universal. It was about lost love. There are many different verses and variants of this song, and so the exact lyrics can lead to a little bit of a different story depending on what version you're seeing, but ultimately there are so many verses and so many adaptations because it was so universal, especially that chorus. And why was it written? Unfortunately, it was originally written for an amateur minstrel show, but it wasn't popular until it was added to an unrelated musical that was not affiliated with minstrel shows. And then it was played and distributed on Tin Pan Alley. So where did it come from? Well, the amateur minstrel show was in Milwaukee, but it gained popularity in Tin Pan Alley in New York. And that's where it was really distributed. When was it written? It was written in 1891. Well, 1891 is pretty darn early. That's real early for the songbook. But what was the influence of the song? Okay, so the main factor that doesn't meet the criteria would be the year. The author is a little questionable, but his credentials seem to check out, again, being very borderline based on the year. So what was the song's influence? It was the most popular song. It was like, I keep saying Taylor Swift in all these videos, but it was like a Taylor Swift #1 hit, right? And it was recorded several times through many decades with performances by super popular relevant artists like Nat King Cole and Alice Faye, for instance. It was also reused in the musical Showboat, which is a musical very solidly within the Great American Songbook, and it was in the musical to showcase popular music of the late 1890s. Ultimately, it is credited with helping to cement Tin Pan Alley as like the place to find new popular songs. It's like how House of Cards and other early Netflix original shows really cemented Netflix as the premier streaming company as streaming was kind of getting rolling, right? Without some of those shows, wouldn't have been as competitive, wouldn't have been as big of a deal. where After the Ball did that for the Great American Songbook for Tin Pan Alley. So is it part of the songbook? Honestly, it depends on who you talk to. I say yes. I count it. It's part of the songbook. I like it. It's a good listen. It's a little out of touch for the Great American Songbook, but it's so close, and it was so influential in the early days of Tin Pan Alley that I would consider it kind of part of it, almost more of an honorary mention, if that makes sense. It's like an honorary mention to the Great American Songbook, and it's mostly due to the creation year. But honestly, the music itself, it has the right vibe to it. It has the right themes. It has the right general feel. It just feels, obviously being from 1891, it feels a little bit older than the rest of the music. It's still very lively. It's still very fun. It is, in so many ways, it strove to be what the Great American Songbook became. Which is why I would consider it kind of part of the American Songbook, but more as an honorable mention or as an aside rather than being part of the core American Songbook. Again, even if I include it, there are a whole host of people who would vehemently disagree with me. And you know what? They would also be correct. They could have a completely opposite view and still be right. And it doesn't make my view wrong. That's the crazy thing about it, because we're talking about the tail beginning and the tail end, right? Another specific example, trying to figure out if something is in the songbook, right? There's a song by Cole Porter called You're the Top. So who wrote it? Well, Cole Porter, one of my personal faves, always very sassy music. Loved Cole Porter's music. Well, not loved past tense. I still love his music. It's great. He's Cole Porter. He's lovely. What is the style? Oh, also, I should mention, Cole Porter is known for being very influential in the Great American Songbook, very relevant, very, very ingrained in the songbook. So what is the style of You're the Top? It's very bouncy, it's clever, it's theatrical, but also easy to follow, again, with a repetitive melody. One thing I find really interesting about this song is it rides the line between being timeless and being so incredibly dated. It goes back and forth between high and lowbrow references, with the highbrow references being fairly timeless. Things like Gandhi and the Mona Lisa, the Tower of Pisa, and then there's more lowbrow references like Ovaltine. Like Ovaltine, I think it might still be around. I don't know. It may or may not still be around, but like Ovaltine was super era specific, but at the same time, it was around for a long time, or at least it was popular for a very long time. So it's this interesting line between being timeless and dated, but it's dated in such a way that it's very much full of pop culture references of the time. And so even if the lyrics aren't as general or totally timeless as many others in the Great American Songbook, the references that are more dated that it uses are very much in line with the ideology of the songbook, and the general theme of the song is honestly universal, about appreciating someone else, about basically the I love you more thing, right? Like, oh, I love you more. That's this whole song. The concept is still very universal and still very relevant, even if not all of the references are. So, why was it written and where did it come from? In this case, are pretty darn similar. So, it was written for the musical Anything Goes. And it came from the popular musical Anything Goes. Anything Goes was a tap musical that did have extreme popularity at the time and has seen many revivals, even some relatively modern ones. It's a musical that's been done again and again and still feels very relevant. It was written in 1934, which also does make it impressive that it continues to be performed to this day. Not necessarily always on Broadway, but there's always some show you can find somewhere, even if it's just a high school doing it. So, what was the true influence of You're the Top? It was one of the ultra-popular songs from the musical Anything Goes, and did have enduring popularity. So, in doing research for this video, I discovered something really interesting I did not know about this song. Apparently, this song was considered particularly funny at the time. And so You're the Top spawned countless parodies. At its height, it was getting like 300 plus parodies a month. But what people were doing was just rewriting the lyrics over and over again. It became like a running gag. Think about something SNL would parody with a series and occasionally have an ongoing sketch that would pop up from time to time for several years. It was pretty culturally ingrained. So to think about how these parodies would go, the actual song went, "You're the top, you're the Mona Lisa, you're the top, you're the Tower of Pisa. I'm a worthless champ, a total scamp, a flop. But if baby I'm the bottom, you're the top." And so people would replace it just with random things, right? Like random comparisons that people just rewrote over the top because it was easy, right? Like if that was just coming out, there are so many things you could write over the top of that and make it relevant. It's like adapting any popular word, any popular song into making a cultural reference, right? People did it all the time. It was apparently just a thing that people did because it was easy. So again, highly influential, very culturally ingrained. Now, let's look, was this part of the songbook though? I mean, yes. Short answer, You're the Top is part of the Great American Songbook. It was released in the core years of the songbook by a composer known to be greatly associated with the songbook, had the right style, the right origins, and also was highly influential. So yes, this would be part of the Great American Songbook and would not be a case that someone would really argue against, right? It's pretty solidly, You're the Top was in the Great American Songbook. All right. So now that we've gone through how to kind of think about whether a song would or would not be in the Great American Songbook, hopefully that adds some clarity. Again, it is really vague. You're welcome to disagree with me. These are purely, yes, I researched examples, blah, 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 but the actual methodology, yeah, it's my opinion, right? Like, it's just a different way to think about it. So I really appreciate you listening to my viewpoint, and it also means a lot that you're interested enough to watch to the end. I really love this topic and hope you find something interesting from the video. Once again, remember the definitions of what is or is not in the Great American Songbook are pretty loose because, again, we are talking about a massive era. So it's okay to disagree. Not everyone's going to have the same viewpoint. If you want to learn more, please do subscribe. I will keep posting related videos and delving deeper into both the Great American Songbook and the Great Forgotten Songbook. As always, feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'll answer the best I can. And if you want to see some of my personal work, click here. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your night!